Welcome to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast. Well, many thanks for joining us on the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast. We're really excited to be joined by a great researcher, Joyce Shoof, who I'll introduce in a second. But we know that biophilic design can really give a return on investment, but just how much? Joyce's new research has shown that biophilic design can really generate a major return on investment from even just like minor improvements. And these can have an effect on employees' performance. And even these relatively low cost interventions like introducing plants or applying a natural colour palette to the interior design. In fact, these biophilic scenarios that she's researched generated more than double the economic value of the non-biophilic scenario. So before I go on and sort of steal your thunder, Joyce, many thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting. It's really lovely to be here.
That's lovely. Thank you. Well, Joyce Shoof, she's a PhD researcher at Loughborough University and also sustainability lead at UK Parliament. She's going to be speaking at Workplace Trends in London on the 18th of April 2024. I'm going to put a link to the spiel that goes with it. She's going to be sharing the results of this research, which proves how biophilic design can really make a difference. So a title of her talk is going to be Reap What You Sow. What's the value of biophilic design? So Joyce, lovely. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, please, what you do? And yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Of course, it's really exciting because I literally just submitted my PhD thesis last week. So everything is really new. I'm still reflecting on what we have been, going through in the last 6 years or so. So it has been a very long journey. I've been multitasking, I'm working, I'm an architect by background, got 2 small children. So doing this PhD is really amazing to have a bit more intellectual freedom apart from, just delivering work. This really allow us to have a think about how we can help the industry to push for more natural-based solution. And it's really about gathering evidence that are meaningful for our decision makers. So that's a nutshell of my background. Try to keep everything in balance, really.
Lovely. What got you interested in sort of nature-based solutions or natural kind of natural enhancements to the built environment? I'm not. You said you were an architect. Is that where it came from or somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, I think really what is more kind of transformational for me is the transition of being a design consultant and architect, working with HOK and many other global practices. Now I have moved on to the client side since 5 years. So I have actually experienced that, to look at the project from a whole life cycle. As an architect, you've probably been asked to do, a bit of feasibility study, and then you develop into technical. You might or might not go on to the construction stage. But being a client working for the parliamentary estate, I am able to, look across the portfolio scale from project briefing to construction and the in-use stage. I think using the in-use stage as a leverage on looking at how we can make our design being a lot more powerful in terms of helping our building occupants, well-being, productivity, and energy efficiency. From that angle is a big gap in our industry. And I think this change of role has impact on the research that I feel like, I now have a bit more understanding about what we can do as designer, architects, interior engineer, what we can do to really integrate the multidisciplinary approach into the way how we deliver workplaces.
Yeah, exactly. I think, like you say, because you've come from architecture and you've worked on that side of it, when you've now sort of jumped ship, as it were,
to the dark side, yeah.
Yeah, particularly with the UK government. And I know we've spoken before, like because we were obviously up in Scotland with Benholm, talking about this some of this research. But it must be really quite intriguing to find out what the challenges are. For the research that you've done, I mean, why did you choose biophilic design? I mean, what was the driver behind that? What made you kind of take up this research?
Yeah, really good question. So although my background is in architecture and sustainability, biophilia seems to be, very much focusing on greeneries. But actually, when you look at the definition of that biophilia, it's just mean the love of life. It means that how we can create spaces that inspire people, creating a sense of belonging. It's space making. So I think for me, biophilia is a way to describe the wider, sustainability agenda and the connections with nature. It's not just about people and nature. It's more about our conscious, our moral obligation with our planet, but also with one another. And I think this is something that has been, globally has been a challenge for us to see the bigger picture of where we live in. It's part of this system. It's not human being, dominating our planet. I think this is kind of the theme that we would like to look at.
Yeah, exactly. I think, like you say, it's looking at that bigger picture. It's looking at the living systems. It's looking at each other. For me as well, like people say, biophilic, it's about putting a plant in the corner and that's it. There's so many different things. It's about creating that natural light and the airflow, but it's also about the interconnectivity with each other. And I was having a conversation this morning, but saying about biodiversity. If we can increase biodiversity outside the space as well, the myriad of sounds, the bird song, all this kind of thing has it's a greater positive effect on our minds and on our brains, because that's what ultimately we were programmed to hear. When we don't hear that variety, then it's kind of also another stressor.
Yeah, and then I also think, putting it into the context of workplace as well, employers is not, just looking at health and safety, but then the well-being of their employees. So I'm very interested to see how biophilia or biophilic design implementation can help to increase business proposition as well. I think, jumping from an architect to now client, looking from the client body from the inside. And it's really interesting to see how we think as a client body. Right? How do we become an intelligent client? We all want to do the right things. So I want to give them an excuse of doing. We're all looking for excuses, isn't it? I think we don't have to convince your audience who are listening to this podcast about the value or the good attributes of biophilia. It's more about how we can communicate the message in a more powerful way that is robust, that both designers and client body can join up with, share the goal.
Yeah, and I know you've got a framework which we're going to chat about in a bit, but maybe we could talk a little bit about the research, actually, what it was and what it does. And then I have to say that I think everybody working in biophilic design will be grateful actually for what you've done, because it shows that even a small intervention can make a difference. I mean, I just pulled out one thing here, that for every £1 spent on a business gain £2.7. So every pound spent, they gain £2 70. I mean, and that's just like, small interventions, like you say, but being able to monetize that, being able to show that, be able to articulate that as a piece of evidence as well, and then being able to help your client demonstrate that, or to actually understand how they can do that, I think is really great. But can you tell us a little bit about the research itself, what it was and where it was and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, of course. I think that's quite catchy, isn't it? To put kind of numbers. I think having gone through the full circle of doing this research for about 6 to 7 years now, one approach is really measuring, giving hard evidence, and I try to kind of understand how client body works. So for both private and public sectors, we do have to go through a business case stage. And I think with my research, I feel that the big missing gap is between the REBA stage 0 and REBA stage 7, which is when we start looking at business opportunity, defining the project brief, to rebirth stage 7, which is the in use stage. So currently in the UK, only 3%, according to the latest rebirth practice survey, only 3% of us are actually offering post-occupancy evaluation as a service. And there is a huge gap in our industry on taking advantage just of our design, capturing the benefits, and putting it forward to our clients. And I'm not saying that we're not doing it, we're just not doing it formally. And that's why I wanted to create a framework so that we can have a common language that we roughly measure our parameters in a similar way. There's no one size fit all approach, but I think collectively we need to be using, building up the momentum, using a baseline that we can all help each other to compare and improve. And that's how it came about, really the missing gap between in use and business case model, and try to create that feedback loop. And that goes with the same as not only biophilia or natural-based solution, it's also with energy, the way how we look at carbon as well. So I will see that the framework that we have created in this research is really transferable. And my approach is not to create something completely new. I mean, the construction and design industry is quite heavily regulated. So I think it's more about maturing the system. So I look at how we can join the dots to make the things that we know already. We know that nature is good for us. We know that for long term, implementing any sustainability, well, not any, but appropriate sustainability strategy will be good for the organization in terms of productivity, operational saving, and all those kind of good things, including reputation risk and stuff like that. But how do we prove that? So I look at the government Green Book guidelines. So they outlined how public procurement should be measuring, evaluating the project, and millions and billions of projects has been using the same model. Then I think, well, why don't we just use that? I mean, if it is about translating intangible benefits to a monetized value, it's a way to actually help decision maker, big public procurement, to kind of push for a better solution, then I think we'd go along with that. And to be honest, part of me would think, well, is it right to monetize happiness? I mean, do we need to put money on well-being in order to make the right decision? So it is really a debate on how we actually do that. So we have launched about 4 case studies to be applying the same strategy in PLP Architect Studio, which is a more agile kind of commercial practices. And then we have launched it in a few public sectors as well. It's a more kind of conservative, traditional workplace environment, to see how this framework can actually help decision making. And we intentionally, create immersive biophilic experience to more kind of typical commercial approaches to see the variation of those, and try to see the value of it. And the outcome is really, really interesting. So the first case study, we found that, with a biophilic implementation, it generated about 1.2 to 1.5 higher value than a do nothing model. So you always have to kind of compare. And I guess one of the challenges is that those figures are not definite. They are still kind of in development, because I think translating well-being to a value is very, very specific to organization. It's contextualized. It's about being in the UK, and I pick workplaces that are in central London. So that might be different if you have a workplace, say, in South Africa or in Asia. So that the conditions are quite different. It's about how you value your well-being in London in this context. So I'm afraid it's not quite generalizable, but I think as long as we know the rules, we can apply the same framework, and then we can draw out value in the early stage through post-occupancy evaluation.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the nutshell of that. It's quite long.
Well, it must also change, mustn't it? I think we had this again. We had this conversation, or you mentioned it or something before. But obviously, the longer people are kind of immersed in a biophilic environment, your well-being changes as well. So it's all right going back after a year or something, but after you go back up to 2 years, and the dynamics in the office and things have changed, and sort of how are they using the space and all that kind of thing. So it's quite all those sort of variables have to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, definitely, it's time bound. So with our post-pandemic workplace has become less of a workplace.
Yes.
People might be using workspace 2 days a week as a socialized space. So I think value links to the way how we use spaces, and value also change. I mean, there's something called a dead weight or an attribution. So we need to take into consideration that we're not overclaiming. So I think we know that it's good, right? But we need to find a way to make this whole economic models consistent and play with the rules as set out by the Green Book or any social return on investment, so that designer can then go out and say, well, this is the full picture. We consider all of this time-based, how people use the space, and these are the value of biophilia.
So can you maybe explain for the people who are listening? I'm going to put some pictures on the website that goes with the podcast. So people, if you're listening to this on Audible or Spotify or iTunes, go to the journal of biophilicdesign.com and go to podcasts and then find this one. But can you maybe explain, just like say for instance the PLP architecture space or one of the other space, what you did, just sort of the 4 different scenarios. I know it was introducing plants and all that kind of thing, but could you maybe just describe it?
Yes, of course. We do have a publication sponsored by the BCO, the British Council for Officers. So I'm really grateful for PLP, Benham, and BCO have taken an interest in this research. And that is actually a 3-month study. And we created laboratories within PLP architecture in central London, the City of London, in a very typical open plan office. So we introduced 3 types of scenario. One is a very much of a naughty corner, a non-biophilic workplace. And then we introduce to our participants for about 2 weeks in a fully immersive with vertical greenery, natural material, and then we open up the view out to a neighboring roof garden. So I think one of the key things that we find out is as much as free stuff you can find on site, we should take advantages of that. So we basically move the workstation, more towards a view that you can enjoy a longer distance, looking into the skies, the sky, the roof garden, to increase that kind of biophilic moment, create the inside out connections. And then we also offer some fruit, and it's about multi-sensory as well. There was some music, bird songs, and it's very democratic. They can the participant can agree on what type of biophilic music they would like to share. I know that those can be quite controversial, the way how you can induce that moment can be very different from person to person, and even depending on the time of the day as well. And then we took away all the biophilic strategy for about a week. And that is the interesting thing, because we intentionally kind of create that wow moment, and then we took it away to see how the participant responds to a non-biophilic scenario again. And then after 2 weeks, we introduce a more kind of moderate implementation to put some plants back, but it's not as immersive, to see if the participant feel strongly about the more kind of typical environment, and then we invite the whole office to come and have a vote to look at the non-biophilic scenario, immersive scenario, and the more kind of typical application of biophilia, which most offices would do, have maybe a 30 to 40% kind of view out to the outside, and then have some kind of plans, but it's not the more kind of lush or immersive experience. So the outcome is really, really interesting, because as expected, people, about 85% of the employees at PLP actually voted for an immersive experience. But then what is surprising is that when you actually put all the well-being score plus the capital investment that we have put into creating those immersive scenarios, the outcomes actually show that with a moderate amount of application, the well-being score is actually higher compared to the immersive one. So sometimes it's what employee wants and what actually creating some kind of benefits from an organizational perspective might not match. And I'm not saying that that's the outcome. It's just a way how you look at, continued investment. It's not just a one-off. You need to consider, how do you maintain, keep the momentum? So you need to think about having maybe a well-being coordinator. If you have indoor plants, how do you maintain it so that it always feel like fresh, and that kind of momentum does have a cost impact. So I think the model works in a way that it really shows kind of the dynamics between perspective and cost implication in that regards.
As you say, it's interesting that the sort of moderate implementation actually brought out the better well-being thing. But you said, I suppose it depends as well what kind of work it is, where it is, all that kind of thing too, doesn't it? So
yeah, and the cascading benefits. So
yeah.
What is surprising is that people does, although it feels like really quantitative, but when we actually interview the participant and people who were involved in this research project, they really talk about the way how they collaborate, and the teamwork has changed as a result of the change of environment. Yeah. So I think you will find quite unexpected benefits that, somehow you can't really measure. But then I question, if you can't measure something, does it not have a value? So I think it's something that we need to be very careful while we try to use monetization to make a business case. But a big part of me do think that it shouldn't hinder us to explore the kind of cascading benefits of a strategy, or a combination of strategies, not just one thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And the fact that the research has proven that the biophilic design implementation has a positive impact. You have these, like you say, these cascading benefits that add and accumulate on top of those things. So, if you were to go back in about 2 years, 3 years time, how the dynamics of the office would be changing. And because we're trying to get people back to the office, like you say, if you are in that sort of space, you're going to be going back to the office to collaborate, to be creative, to have meetings. So if you can design these spaces, which is going to engender communication and ideas and creativity, I think it's really, really wonderful. I wanted to ask you, how did you measure it? And I know we spoke about wearables and all this kind of thing, but
yes,
I mean, what was how on earth did you measure it? I mean,
what
was the thing?
It's interesting. There were a few stages. So in the early stage of my research, I thought I must be able to measure that. So I explore quite a lot of neurodiversity using EEG, and work very closely with Professor Derek Clements Croome as well on basically using sensors. So a lot of different sensors measuring facial expressions, measuring brainwave. So I was very, very convinced, I'm still convinced, that our physiological changes can somehow give us the clue of how biophilic design can improve our well-being. But once I have gone through the process, I realized that there is a reason why we can't measure that. It's just, it's not a laboratory. So there are lots of external influences. When people walk past and where conversation goes, although you can, wear your headset 24/7 now, in theory, and you can, go about with different type of sensor 24/7. So you can look at not just the well-being within the operating hour, but also outside. So, stress and our sleep quality can impact on productivity as well. So we see that smart building technologies, those sensors, IoT sensors, can really inform the way how we measure well-being. But then, after 2 years, I realized that, it's very complicated. And as I mentioned, POE post-occupancy evaluation, it has a very, very low uptake in the industry. So pushing for having more sensors and measuring brain wave and facial expression is still quite a difficult, challenging, well, not just on cost, but technical implication as well at this moment in time. But I see the potential of us doing that if we manage to look at, how we deal with privacy, sharing of personal information, because that is really relied on engagement with building occupants, that they will need to kind of enable the employer, the organization, to be looking at a more holistic approach, and that could be a very sensitive thing. So that's when I kind of drop out the physiological changes. I think it has a lot of potential, but it's not realistically can be done at this moment in time. And I wanted the framework to be able to implement it from, the day one, sorry for my children, day one of this research. That's why I have gone down to the social value methodologies, which is another way of looking at value. So translating intangible benefits of well-being to something very tangible for decision making. I feel that this is the route for us as designer to be able to take advantages of at this moment in time. And there are lots of existing models currently we can take advantages of. Their existing POE evaluation questionnaire like Leesman, and the bus model has already got all those well-being scale within the questionnaire. And then if we can link those questions with the social value methodologies, we can then start to relate well-being score with monetized value. So that's how it can be measured. But it does need, consensus from client, from building occupants. So I think the key things of this research is really about collaboration, and putting biophilia and POE, post-occupancy evaluation, into a standard procurement process is really, really important. So design needs to be following through the whole project life cycle in order to be able to contribute to this kind of initiative.
Yeah, and like you say, there are things like the Leesman sort of studies and the wearables and this kind of thing. So people can do it, and of course, I suppose people can outsource it as well, can't they, to different companies? But
I think with building management systems, so for example, PLP, one of PLP design building is the Arch building, Deloitte in Amsterdam. And they have already got a lot of different sensors. And I don't think we need to measure brainwave or facial expression. We can measure temperature, which is quite regular, humidity and noise level potentially. And you can also translate those different trends into a well-being score. But it does need a bit of work. It's not part of my research But I think there are infrastructure in place for us to be looking at building quite differently.
So obviously the research that you've done has shown that, you know, you can have a real massive impact and a real positive impact. If you were going to sort of advise like designers or architects or business owners, what can they do basically? What would you advise them to do if you were going to say like, well, let's put some biophilic implementations in this space? I mean, I suppose, and obviously I know it will depend on where the space is, but is there kind of like a bit of a baseline?
Definitely. One really interesting thing is when we start to measure the perception of building occupants, we didn't find that the existing workplace is that bad. I think a lot of modern building and you know, of course, we talk about there's no one size fits all, but I think similar to, again, to the energy efficiency, once you start commissioning the building without actually doing any intervention at all, you will find that there are good bits that any organization have done. And I think there are low-hanging fruit. I think it's really important that we ask our occupants what they want consistently, and then do it at least once a year within the organization. And then that way you can start to look at the trend. And then I think with biophilia, especially with indoor plants, it's not, you know, everyone's cup of tea. I realize that, although I really love, you know, being in an immersive environment, but we need to respect the different kind of perspective. So collaboration is really key. And I think, you know, with smart building technology, those are the key area, like really basic. Actually, biophilia covers temperature and daylight. Those are not rocket science. Those are like basic human needs to be able to, you know, look outside and feel comfortable. Again, although we think that people do not create increased productivity without comfortable backdrops, but that's not always true. I think it's creating the diverse spaces for people, highlighting, you know, for example, the well-building standard, highlighting quiet space and loud spaces. So allowing the biodiversity, recognizing there are different needs within a group of people. We need a very diverse workforce to be able to, you know, produce something creative. I think enabling that kind of diversity within the workspace is the key. And I think making sure that biophilic design is part of the wider ESG, environmental, social, and governance agenda. I think we might think that this is just a design strategies, but then by capturing well-being, by monetizing well-being, is massively kind of important in our whole business agenda. When we look at CSR, corporate social sustainability, how do we improve not only our workforce, but the way how we procure our fit out material? How do we, you know, generate a sense of belongings? People, especially, you know, the newer generation, they will feel proud if the organization are implementing a more sustainable, more inclusive business decision. So I think that is part of the conversation of bringing it back to the vision of a business strategy.
Because it'll help recruitment as well, wouldn't it? Like you say, you know, if you've got different generation, or even our, you know, my generation, I want to work in a space that's really nice. And I also want to feel that the company cares, because I think, you know, especially if you're, you know, you've got skills that you can sort of wave around, as it were. You know, you want to be making sure you're working with a company. So if companies are trying to get the best talent, then creating spaces and to visually show that you're that you care about your staff, that you listen to them, like you say, kind of ask people, what spaces do you need? Do you need a quiet space? Do you need a working space? Do you like a living wall? What should we have in the living wall? Do you know what I mean? To really engage people. I mean, there might even be people that want to care for those plants or learn how to do it. So there'll be like a social aspect, so people can kind of get together and when we know that there's all those sort of positive spaces that you get on rooftop gardens, for instance, where people go and in hospital in the coup. Huat Hospital in Singapore, they go on the roof and they have the fruit and the food and they take it back and the patients can eat it. And it's just such a lovely sort of 360 holistic kind of way of being. And it's a mindset change, it's a culture change. But I think if we all listen to our hearts, it would actually happen. It's kind of, and it's
Yeah,
what I love about the research that you've done is that the stuff that we feel intuitively, like you said right at the beginning, the stuff that we know that nature is really good for us, being able to monetize that. And I loved how you said, you don't like the idea of monetizing happiness, but actually we do need to do that because ultimately the businesses are the ones who are paying for it, and they do have to placate and appease and whatever else their shareholders and make sure they work on the NASDAQ and all this kind of thing. But to being able to go, look, actually, this does work. We know it, we feel it. You want to do it. Look at this. Look what can happen. Um,
yeah. I guess the way how we monetize it is, I think is how we use it. If
yeah.
we manage to create a common currency, so it's, you talk about holistic, is really well said, it's really good summary. And I think what we are trying to do is basically to say, well, there's so many things you can do. Is there are 15 patterns of biophilic design as proposed by Keller. You can use any combinations. So I think creating the monetization is really for a way for us to do options appraisal of very different strategy. How do you weight, say, sourcing from a sustainable procurement, comparing to having work experience, comparing, planting more trees into our courtyard or creating a rooftop spaces. So there are value attached to kind of the different way of designing our building. I think if we can use that to look at how this inform our decision making, that is a good way, rather than saying that, oh, I generate double the amount, which is a good thing to show, but it's just really one part of the story. I think is the way how designer and business leaders can take advantages of those capability and really look at our heart, as you say, what is the best for our people.
Exactly. Was there anything surprising that came out of the research for you? Was there anything that made you kind of go, oh, wasn't expecting that?
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, we were all so convinced that the immersive scenario would be, the best option overall, which was kind of true. But then when we actually look at the reality of how things unfold, um, um, looking at the time, so we look at how long the immersive scenario would need to have some kind of intervention. And that's the thing about using monetization. You need to look at the whole life cycle, like building by layers. So once you start really looking at the bigger picture, it might pull you back to a more kind of moderate reality. So it was quite surprising to find out actually the typical scenario has the best value over time. But then really, looking at that on hindsight, it really describe, what is happening. And then I think without that monetization aspect, properly, the organization won't do anything because it's just not tangible for them to do anything. Now at least they are trying to implement a biophilic solution across the whole office as a result of that. And then I think we need to recognize with biophilic design, again, there's loads of different combination. And so one strategy cannot be applied to the whole office. I think immersive design is more for kind of social spaces, and then typical implementation, it needs a bit of consultation. I think it needs to say, well, it can't be applied the same way to the whole office. So I think it's highlighting the needs of creating diverse spaces. What is really surprising is that actually what we thought the trend of immersive to the typical scenario, from also taking all the immersive strategy away from people, does, across the board, does create that job. And I think it highlights what you said, how can organization or workplaces attract people? So once you have given people a choice of being in places that they feel like they belongs to there. Once you take it away, it's really difficult for people to accept the lesser kind of scenario. So we need to make sure that we continuously improve and react to what employees actually want. And better than me now that most typical organizations spend 90% of their expenditure in people. So I think that is a really, really strong message for any well-being strategy, human-centric strategy, to be really focusing on our changing needs.
Yeah, I remember there was a study years ago. I can't remember what it was. It was they put them in a booth, and they had people like add up, or it was doing a maths thing or something. I think it was students actually. Gosh, I should remember this, but they it was like in a box with nothing. Then they put a couple of plants in, and then they added up better. And then they put some more plants in, and they added up even better. Then it was too many, but then they took all the plants away, and then they were like, "Oh, I can't," There was like having had them, and then the best one was actually when they could move them around themselves. They had control over it, and it goes back to that kind of it. Basically, it's it's that you've it's the same concept really. It's this collaboration. It's this, well, what do you want, the users in the space, what are you going to be using it for? Like you say, it's about, if you're going to design the space, let's talk to the occupants. Let's talk about, what do you want? How do you feel about this? Do you want more of this in there? Is it, because also if there's too many plants, there's too much visual complexity, which we know has a play on our brains. So having just the right sort of, it's like, the magic porridge pot and Goldilocks, isn't it? Just getting the just getting it just right, really. That's kind of what it is, isn't it? Really, I suppose. you know. Can I, the framework that you've created, is that, I mean, I don't know if you can sort of describe that in some way, and can people access it? Can people see it? Can people look at it? Can people use it? Or what sort of format is that in?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So the framework really grew out from 3 existing frameworks. So one of them is actually the Flourish framework that is quite heavily used. CIPC, BCO have been, mentioned. So my framework is really focusing on the monetization aspect. So it's called the Biophilic Value Framework. We published this partly through the BCO in 2020, I think, but I will put a link on that. So basically, we look at design attributes, and then there are objective and subjective measurements. So it's really important to look at biophilia from a holistic angle, as you highlight. And then there is the last quadrant, which is the economic model. And that economic model is based on the Green HM Treasury Green Book. So they are all published data. I think the magic is really about how do you link the different aspects into one framework so that it's ready for designer to use as a tool to plug in, whatever data you can get in POE and present this into a format that can be comprehensible for decision makers. So I think we all know that sustainability is just so overwhelming. The more you look at that, the more things we find out that we need to see. So I'm hoping that this framework have helped to simplify the way how we describe the benefits of biophilia, but not to simplify in a way that it makes it, almost not meaningful. So I take a very balanced view on benefits is a tool for us to create early engagement, to create reference points. So it's really important for us to understand what is the baseline. It relies on having a tangible before and after evaluation in order to say this is the value. So the value is really driven by the unit of change from, from doing nothing to having some kind of a different strategy. And then we can look at, how different ways. And then I apply the project management approach. So it does have the traffic light system. So what is, good is green, amber is what you do normally, red is something that is really hitting the bottom line. I don't know if you heard about the donut economy, which is really inspiring.
Amazing.
Yeah, so I apply the 2 ring systems. Anything that kind of go inside of the ring, which in the donut economy is about not meeting basic human needs. So in the workplace, it's rather difficult because we're not dealing with poverty or any fundamental problem. However, you will be actually really, really surprised, even with a brilliant, very good, excellent building or building that are designing towards well building standard, you can still find like problems with especially air quality in new commercial buildings. So those kind of fundamental kind of indoor environmental quality, if it falls within the core, the inside ring, it means that it's a health and safety issue. I think some of those we need to recognize that we're still not perfect in the way how we specify material and operating our building as well. So anything that kind of go outside of that ring is good. So I make it very easy for designer and decision maker visually to see what's happening in a nutshell. So it has perception, it has indoor environmental quality, and then it has a quadrant to show the value, and then the value has an arrow to show what is before and what is after. So there's a trend, and we accept that some of them will be, negative value, because we can't rule out that previous workplace could be better. So it has a very balanced approach in the way how we present it. And I think that is the most convincing way. We need to be honest. We need to be kind of stop finger pointing. I think our industry is very afraid of risk, and we should be now mature enough to recognize that we can do all the right thing, but still there are things that goes wrong. There are different type of contract now, like framework contract, to really allowing client body, consultants and contractor to be working towards a more measurable performance outcome. And I think this framework will help to kind of enable that more collaborative environment.
Yeah, it sounds brilliant. And so listeners, I'm going to be putting a link to the framework and a visual as well from some of the research on the journal@biophilicdesign.com, so people can go and have a look at that. Go to the podcast tab and then search for the podcast that I've done with Joyce here. But Joyce, many thanks for joining us. And before I ask you the final magic question, is there anything else you'd like to add at this point?
No, I can't emphasize enough about doing meaningful post-occupancy evaluation and really looking at neurodiversity. I think it's coming a long way, that it has been really getting the momentum in the last 5 years or so. But I hope I cover well. I think it's really kind of important for us to recognize the advancement of technology will help us to understand a lot better on our day-to-day, our productivity flow. So it will come.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, listeners, do come and see Joyce at Workplace Trends in London on the 18th of April 2024, in case you listen to this next year. I'm going to put a link as well to the registration area as well on the website. But Joyce, so final question. If you could paint the world with a magic brush of biophilia, what would it look like?
Oh gosh, that's the best question. I would like to paint the world with more biodiversity. I think it's something that is so challenging that it really relies on global action. And really I feel my heart sink when I see that 44% of our land on earth is really damaged by us, human actions. And I feel like if I would have a magic wand, I would like us to recognize a lot more the way how we produce our food. Personally, I think we can do a lot of things in order to pay more attention to what we eat, where our food come from, and creating urban greenery, urban farming would be amazing, that we can get much closer to nature. And I think the magic wand is with us, because I think on a personal level, we can do so much to help to improve our environment.
Thank you for listening to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast.